And greetings, friends. Today I want to talk to you about 1 Corinthians, the 16th chapter, verse 2, that says this. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store, as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. And of course, a lot of people take this to mean that this is absolute proof that the first century church kept Sunday. And of course, had collections every single Sunday to support the church. Is that true? Is that what the scripture's telling us? Now, many mainstream fundamentalist Christians believe that that's what the scripture is actually saying. And I'll just read to you from this book, The Sabbath in Scripture and History, page 124, where it says this. Leon Morris comments, "This is the first piece of evidence to show that Christians observed that day," talking about Sunday. Ralph Martin writes, "This is undoubtedly an allusion to the church's holy day, the day of Christian fellowship in commemoration of the Lord's resurrection and the day of the supper meal." Stephen Barabbas declares, "Paul directed the Corinthian Christians to bring their weekly offering to the charities of the church on the first day of the week." So these people are convinced that this scripture absolutely proves that the Church of God kept Sunday in the first century. Is that what the scripture's telling us? Did they really take up a collection plate every single Sunday? And does the scripture prove that they gathered on Sunday? Well, when you look at the context of these verses, you will see that the collection that was being gathered for the church was a special collection for the church in Jerusalem, because there was a famine going on, and the Church of Jerusalem needed famine relief. So this was a special collection. It wasn't a weekly collection that was happening. It was a special collection, famine relief for the church in Jerusalem. If you go back to Acts, the 11th chapter, Acts 11, in verse 27, it says this, in these days came prophets from Jerusalem unto Antioch. There were still prophets. Then, of course, when the Bible was finished in the book of Revelation, there was no more prophets. It says there came prophets, and it says, verse 28, that there stood up one of them named Agabus, and signified by the Spirit that there should be a great dearth or a famine throughout all the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar. And then it says in verse 29, then the disciples, every man according to his ability, determined to send relief unto the brethren which dwelt in Judea, which also they did, and sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul. So it was a special collection, a famine relief. And it says here in verse 3 of 1 Corinthians 16, it says, and when I come, whosoever ye shall approve by your letters, them will I send to bring your liberality unto Jerusalem. So it's plain that this is the famine relief for the church at Jerusalem. And you can also read this in 2 Corinthians, the 8th chapter, verses 1 and 3, 2 Corinthians 9, verses 1 through 2 and 12, and Romans, the 15th chapter, verses 25 through 28. This is a famine relief. It is a special collection. It wasn't a weekly collection that was going on in church. That's number one. Number two, notice what it says here. It says, upon the first day of the week. Does that mean Sunday? Now, if you notice, this phrase, the first day of the week, is mentioned 8 times in the Bible. Not Sunday, but the first day of the week. Now, if you notice, number one, the word day is italicized, and it's not in the original. In all 8 places of the Bible, and I'm looking at it here on my laptop, in all 8 places of the Bible, the word day is italicized and not in the original Greek manuscripts. And it should read this way. And I'll just quote to you a couple of other Bible translations, as you see on the screen there. The Apostolic Bible Polyglot says, according to one of the Sabbaths. Cypher says, upon the first Sabbath. The CLV version, on one of the Sabbaths. ISV version, after the Sabbath ends. The LITV version, on one of the Sabbaths, and so on. And there are many other translations that translate this correctly, as it should read, instead of upon the first day of the week, it should read, and upon one of the Sabbaths. And when did the Apostle Paul visit the church? Well, he visited the church on the Sabbath day. I'll show you one scripture here. In Acts the 16th chapter, verse 12, it says this, "And from thence to Philippi, which is the chief city of that part of Macedonia, and a colony," here's the Apostle Paul traveling around, it says, "and a colony, and we were in that city abiding certain days." So there he is in that city, abiding certain days. And then it says in verse 13, "And on the Sabbath," not Friday, not Sunday, on the Sabbath, we went out of the city by a riverside where prayer was accustomed to be made. And we sat down and spake unto the women which resorted there." On the Sabbath, he visited the brethren. In Acts the 17th chapter, verse 2, it says, "And Paul, as his manner was," or as his habit or his custom was, just like you read of Jesus Christ in the Gospel of Luke, "as his manner was, went in unto them, and 3 Sabbath days reasoned with them out of the Scriptures." So the Apostle Paul gathered on the Sabbath. He visited the church on the Sabbath. So it says here, upon the first day of the week, should read, "And on one of the Sabbaths," he's saying, on one of the Sabbaths, and notice it says, "there be no collections when I come." When does he go to church? On the Sabbath. When does he visit the brethren? On the Sabbath. So he's saying here, on one of the Sabbaths, "let every one of you lay by him in store as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come." So he's saying on one of the Sabbaths. Now the newer translations say, "put aside a part of what you have earned, as God has prospered you, save it up and store it up." And he's saying, bring that when I come on the Sabbath day. That's all he's saying. So he's saying, store up a part of what you have earned for the famine relief for Jerusalem, and bring it when I come on one of the Sabbaths, when I come, when of course, he visits the church. So this scripture is proving that they kept the Sabbath day. And what were the saints collecting for the church in Jerusalem? Was it money? Well, actually, it was a collection of foodstuffs that they were gathering together to send these foodstuffs to the church in Jerusalem to relieve them of their famine. It wasn't money at all, as this article says here. It says some translations assume the collection for the saints means money. However, the relief to be sent was more likely to have been a collection of fruit, barley, wheat, nuts, dates, figs, cheese, raisins, and other foods common to that area. Of course, they were living in an agrarian society. And then a little later on it says, Paul explains that it would be better to have set their relief aside, ready to go, so that the couriers could pick it up and, of course, send it to Judea. As you read in verse 3, it says, "And when I come, whomsoever ye shall approve by your letters, them will I send to bring your liberality unto Jerusalem." As this article continues, it says here, it says, "whomsoever," and them, talking about that verse, meaning a number of brethren were required to bring the relief items to Jerusalem, likely a caravan. So a caravan full of foodstuffs they were going to send to Jerusalem to relieve the Jerusalem church of their famine. Now, some people might say, well, aren't they breaking the Sabbath day by doing all of this? Absolutely not. The work of salvation, which is what this is, the work of salvation is allowed on the Sabbath. Relieving human need is allowed on the Sabbath. And you can read that in Mark, the 2nd chapter, verse 23 to 27, and Matthew, the 12th chapter, verse 5, and even John, the 5th chapter, verse 17, when Jesus was healing on the Sabbath. He says, "My Father works, and I also work," talking about the Sabbath. And what was that work? It was the work of salvation, not creative works, but the work of salvation. The work of salvation is allowed on the Sabbath. So the church was not breaking the Sabbath day. So to say that this scripture proves that the church, they were keeping Sunday and taking up a collection plate every single Sunday, is just another Bible misconception.